Steel forges more than weapons in mountain towns. It shapes destinies and sharpens secrets that most folks never notice. But some people know exactly how deep those blade marks go. Before we begin our tale, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow we've saved something truly extraordinary for you. The Crimson Forge stood at the edge of Ravencrest Valley like a defiant ember against the coming dusk. From the outside, it looked like any other mountain blacksmith's workshop. Weathered stone walls darkened by decades of smoke, a slate roof patched with copper sheets that gleamed dully in the fading light, and a courtyard where scattered tools and half-finished projects spoke of honest labor. But beneath its humble exterior, the forge served a more intricate purpose, one that went far beyond shaping metal into mere tools and trinkets. Inside, the air shimmered with heat from the massive forge that had given the workshop its name, its flames casting dancing shadows across walls lined with finished pieces that ranged from practical farming implements to ornate ceremonial blades. Elena Drake moved through this familiar space with the fluid grace of someone who had grown up within its walls. At 23, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that made people trust her craftsmanship without questioning her age or gender. Her dark hair was always neatly braided back from her face, her clothes practical but well-maintained, her manner professional yet approachable. Nothing about her suggested she'd ever been anything other than what she appeared to be, just another skilled artisan, making an honest living in a mountain town that valued traditional crafts. The local farmers appreciated how she could repair their tools with an expertise that matched her father's. The merchants valued her eye for detail in crafting decorative pieces, and Master Thomas Drake, her father, took pride in how she had maintained the forge's reputation since taking over more of the day-to-day operations. On this particular autumn evening, Elena was finishing her usual routine, banking the forge fires, organizing her tools, and preparing materials for the next day's work. The regulars had already collected their completed orders, old Samuel Chen picking up his repaired plow blade, Maria from the tavern retrieving her new set of cooking knives, and the usual stream of townspeople seeking repairs or commissioned works. The workshop's heavy oak door creaked open, letting in a gust of mountain air along with her father, his broad shoulders tense as he carried a wrapped bundle that made Elena's practiced eye narrow slightly. "Another restoration project?" she asked, noting how carefully he handled the package. Thomas Drake's weathered face showed concern as he placed the bundle on her workbench, his calloused hands hovering over it momentarily before drawing back. "Of a sort," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Lord Commander Roland's personal blade. They say it hasn't been properly maintained since the Northern Campaign." Elena's hands stilled on the sword she'd been polishing, her reflection in the steel showing nothing of the memories that name stirred. 5 years had passed since the campaign, since the time when blade maintenance meant far more than simple restoration work. Her father's eyes carried a weight that suggested he wasn't just discussing metalwork. Before Elena could respond, the workshop's door opened again, admitting 3 men whose bearing set off warning bells in her mind. They moved differently from the usual customers, too controlled, too aware. The leader wore fine clothes that had never seen a day's honest work, while his companions carried themselves with the rigid posture of trained fighters. "Evening," Elena greeted them with professional courtesy, noting how they positioned themselves, one near the door, one with a clear view of the back entrance, and their leader settling near her workbench. "We're here about a commission," the leader stated, his accent suggesting he'd never been within 100 miles of Ravencrest before today. "Your finest work, price is no object." As Elena prepared to discuss terms, she noticed something peculiar about the second man's sword belt. It bore the distinctive markings of the Queen's Shadow Guard, but the patterns were subtly wrong, the kind of detail most people would miss. But Elena had spent years of her life noticing such things, back when her forge work had been a cover for different skills entirely. The night progressed with an undercurrent of tension that only Elena seemed to sense. Her father disappeared into his private workshop, allegedly to begin work on Lord Commander Roland's blade, though the sound of him pacing carried through the thick walls. The 3 strangers remained, examining finished pieces and watching, just watching. Elena continued her closing routine, every movement calculated and smooth while her mind raced through possibilities and contingencies. She'd been on both sides of what was about to happen, though that was something Elena Drake, respected blacksmith of 5 years, wasn't supposed to know anything about. Through the workshop's windows, Elena caught glimpses of movement in the courtyard. More shadows than there should be, moving with too much purpose for casual passers-by. She thought of the hidden compartment beneath her workbench where certain blades were stored, ones whose craftsmanship spoke of skills far beyond simple forge work. Her father had warned her when she took over the forge that some questions were better left unasked, some details better left unknown, but Elena had recognized the look in his eyes that day, the same desperate look she'd seen in countless others during her previous life, the look of someone trapped in something too big to escape alone. The morning sunlight painted Ravencrest Valley's winding streets in deceptively peaceful shades of amber and gold. Elena's routine started long before the forge fires needed lighting, beginning with a dawn practice session in the hidden chamber beneath the workshop, regardless of weather or circumstance. Old habits died hard, and staying sharp had kept her alive long enough to need new habits in the first place. She'd learned years ago that routines could save your life or end it, if you weren't careful about who was watching them. This morning, something felt off even before her practice began. She'd noticed the black lacquered carriage with the silver trim parked 3 streets down from the forge, its horses too fine for local stock, their military-grade barding suggesting they were chosen for speed rather than show. It was the same carriage she'd seen circling the Crimson Forge the night before, making 3 passes before disappearing into the mountain mist. Elena had catalogued every detail. Northern Kingdom heraldry less than a month old, a distinctive scratch on the door panel that had been recently painted over, matched team of grays that spoke of careful breeding and professional handling. She took a different route than usual to fetch water from the well, cutting through the old temple grounds and doubling back twice to confirm her suspicions. The carriage followed at a distance, amateur work that made Elena almost miss the professionals who used to hunt her. Almost. As she rounded the corner past Way's apothecary shop, she heard a commotion in the narrow alley between the buildings. A group of local troublemakers had cornered something, their laughter carrying an edge that made Elena's jaw tighten. She recognized 2 of them, the Blackwood brothers, whose father ran the local mercenary guild and asked too few questions about where their contracts came from. Just leave it, she told herself, continuing her pace. Not your problem. Then she heard the cry, sharp, young, desperate. Before she could stop herself, Elena was already moving toward the alley, her water bucket providing convenient weight should things turn physical. The troublemakers scattered at her approach, their bravado evaporating at the sight of an adult, though the Blackwood brothers hesitated just long enough to shoot her defiant looks. Elena recognized that look. She'd seen it on other young fighters, the ones who usually ended up in unmarked graves before their 20th year. Behind a stack of empty crates, she found what had drawn their attention. A young girl, probably no more than 12, with clothes too fine for the merchant quarter, and a wooden practice sword clutched in white-knuckled hands. The girl's intelligent eyes tracked Elena's every movement, reminding her of people she'd known in her previous life, people who'd learned the hard way not to trust easily. Easy there, Elena said softly, crouching down to appear less threatening. I'm not going to hurt you. The girl maintained her defensive stance, her practice sword revealing proper form despite her fear. Elena noticed she favored her left side, and a fresh bruise on her cheek suggested the Blackwood brothers had managed at least 1 hit before she'd intervened. Elena reached slowly into her apron pocket and pulled out a small cloth-wrapped bundle of healing herbs she always carried, old habits from her previous life that had proven useful in her new one. The movement caused the girl to raise her practice sword higher, but there was more determination than fear in the gesture. Elena recognized that look. She'd seen it in mirrors often enough during her first years of training. Your choice, she told the girl, placing the herbs on a nearby crate before backing away. The girl's eyes darted between Elena and the herbs, her stance never wavering. Elena waited, time being something she'd learned to use as a tool rather than an enemy. She was about to leave when she noticed the craftsmanship of the practice sword, Northern Kingdom style, but with modifications she'd seen only once before, in the private training halls of the Queen's Shadow Guard. "You're a long way from the capital," Elena muttered. The girl's eyes widened slightly, intelligence shining through the fear. A door opened further down the alley, and Master Wei stepped out of his shop's back entrance, carrying a basket of dried herbs. He stopped when he saw Elena and the girl, his expression shifting from surprise to knowing assessment. "That's the third young noble this month," he said, keeping his voice low and calm. "Valley's getting overrun since they increased recruitment for the Shadow Guard." Elena had known Wei for years but had never spoken to him directly about certain matters. He was newer to Ravencrest, having taken over the old apothecary shop 2 years ago. There were rumors about why he'd chosen such a remote location for his practice, whispers about certain specialized medicines that found their way to very particular clients, but Elena made it a point not to pay attention to rumors. She had enough of her own. "This one's not exactly a typical recruit," Elena replied, gesturing to the practice sword's distinctive modifications. Wei moved closer, his movements measured and professional. The girl's stance shifted slightly, but Elena noticed it lacked the same intensity it had shown toward her initially. "Interesting." "Former palace trainee," Wei corrected, noticing the sword's craftsmanship. "From her form and that sword's modifications, I'd say she's been on her own for at least a few months." He studied Elena with the same clinical attention he'd given the girl. Most people would have just walked past. Most people did, Elena thought, standing slowly. "Including me. Almost." Wei pulled a small packet from his herb basket and held it out. "Bring her around to the shop's front entrance. I'll take a look at that bruise and see about that favored side." He paused, his next words carrying a weight that suggested he wasn't just talking about the girl's injuries. "Sometimes the students that find us are the ones that need teaching most." Elena looked at the packet, then at the girl, then back at Wei. "I'm not really looking to take on students. Good thing I didn't ask you to teach her," Wei interrupted with a slight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just bring her in, unless you have somewhere more important to be." The question carried no judgment, but something in his tone made Elena think of her father's words from the night before, about how some folks in this town ask too many questions while others know better. Elena took the packet, watching as Wei returned to his shop. The girl had relaxed slightly during their conversation, her practice sword lowered but not sheathed, while her eyes constantly scanned the alley entrances. A survivor, then. Elena could respect that. As they approached the apothecary shop 20 minutes and several reassuring words later, Elena noticed the black lacquered carriage had reappeared, now parked across the street. The driver's window was open just enough to allow brief glimpses of movement inside, and Elena caught the glint of what might have been a spyglass lens. The girl tensed, her grip tightening on the practice sword. "Yeah," Elena muttered, guiding her toward the shop's entrance. "I don't like them either." The apothecary's waiting room smelled of dried herbs and ancient wisdom. Elena sat in one of the worn chairs, watching as Wei examined the girl in the adjacent room through a latticed screen. The young fighter had remained surprisingly calm during their walkover, matching Elena's pace as if they'd made some unspoken agreement. "Her name is Lin," Wei announced, emerging from the examination room. He held up a small medallion. "Found this sewn into her tunic's lining, Palace Training Corps, but there's something odd about the registration details." Elena raised an eyebrow, waiting. In her experience, people always shared more when you let them fill the silence. "The medallion was issued 3 years ago," Wei continued, "but the Palace Training Corps didn't start accepting female students until 18 months ago, and the registration number doesn't exist in any official records." Before Elena could respond, the shop's door chimed, and Thomas Drake walked in, his face darkening when he saw Elena. "Thought I might find you here. Word travels fast when someone sees you playing hero in an alley." Wei's posture stiffened slightly. "Master Drake, I wasn't aware you needed any medicinal supplies." "Just checking on my daughter," Thomas said, his tone carefully neutral. "Elena, we need to discuss Lord Commander Roland's blade. The restoration requirements have changed." Elena recognized the code. Something had gone wrong with their latest commission, but her father's presence here in person suggested it was worse than just specifications. "I'll need about 20 minutes to finish up here," Elena replied, watching her father's reaction. The older man's left hand twitched toward his belt, their signal for immediate danger. "I can keep Lynn here for observation," Wei offered, misreading the tension. "That bruise needs proper treatment. Plus, I'd like to look into this medallion situation." "Lynn?" Thomas's voice carried an edge that made the girl's shoulders tense. "Fitting name for someone who appears out of nowhere, wouldn't you say, Elena?" Elena stood slowly, maintaining her casual demeanor despite the warning bells going off in her head. Thomas never took risks like this, coming to find her in public, dropping hints about their real work. Something had him spooked. "The herbs are on me," Elena told Wei, reaching for her coin purse. "Consider it community service." Wei waved her off. "Let's wait and see if anyone claims her first, though given what happened at the Palace Training Corps, I'm not holding my breath." "What do you mean?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. Their weapons master disappeared last spring. Guards found his quarters empty, but no sign of him leaving the palace grounds. His second-in-command swears he was acting strange the week before, nervous, checking over his shoulder. Said he'd mentioned something about training certain students against protocol. Thomas's face had gone pale. "Tragic business, that. Elena, we really need to—" The shop's door chimed again. A woman in riding leathers walked in, her boots too well made for Ravencrest's dusty streets. Elena noticed the subtle bulge beneath her jacket, a throwing knife harness, professionally concealed. "Master Wei?" The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Lady Vess. I believe you used to work at the Royal Academy's medical wing." Wei's face had drained of color. "That was a long time ago. We're closed for midday preparations now if you could come back." "Actually," Lady Vess interrupted smoothly, "I'm here about the girl. Word travels fast in mountain towns, doesn't it, Master Drake?" Thomas's hands were trembling slightly. "Elena, the blade restoration can wait." "Master Wei is right," Elena finished, moving subtly to position herself between Wei and Lady Vess. "The shop's closed for midday." Lady Vess's smile widened. "Interesting. The blacksmith's daughter finds a runaway trainee, the healer with a complicated past, and the forge master who's been making some interesting deliveries to the Northern Kingdom's border posts." She reached into her jacket, causing everyone to tense, but withdrew only an ornate calling card. "When you're ready to discuss the real reason I'm here, send word to this address." She placed the card on the counter and left, the bell's cheerful chime at odds with the heavy silence she left behind. Lynn emerged from behind the screen, her practice sword held with newfound purpose, and Elena noticed something she'd missed before. On the wooden blade's handle, partially hidden by worn wrappings, was a small silver inlay. Not the official Palace Training Corps mark, but something custom-made. The pattern matched the distinctive scratch she'd noticed on the black carriage's door panel. "Elena," Wei said carefully, "I think you should close the forge early today and maybe stay somewhere other than your workshop tonight." "You don't know what you're getting into," Thomas warned, but his voice lacked conviction. Elena thought about the black carriage outside, about Lady Vess's two perfect riding leathers, about how Lynn had gone from fearful to watchful in the span of an hour. "No," she replied, watching Wei gather his most essential herbs with shaking hands. "But I'm starting to think I know exactly what I got out of 5 years ago, and now it's followed me here." Thomas's pocket watch chimed softly, a message carefully encoded in its mechanical song that made him curse under his breath. 3 royal guards just entered the forge. They're asking for you, Elena, by your old name." Lynn moved to Elena's side, holding her practice sword with a determination that seemed at odds with their brief acquaintance. In the young girl's focused stance and unwavering gaze, Elena recognized something she hadn't seen in a long time, a student who understood that sometimes survival meant choosing your teachers carefully. "Take Wei out the back," Elena told her father. "Then get to the forge and act normal. I'll handle our guests." "Elena." Wei started to protest, but she cut him off. "Some questions are better left unasked," she said, echoing her father's words from earlier. "But since they're asking anyway, might as well give them the answers they don't want to hear." The walk back to the Crimson Forge took exactly 7 minutes, enough time for Elena to recall precisely why she'd left her old life behind. The weight of the short sword pressed against her spine, retrieved from a hidden compartment in her father's private workshop. 5 years ago, she'd promised herself never to draw it again. Promises, like identities, sometimes needed adjustment. Lynn moved alongside her, somehow matching her pace despite her youth. The girl's eyes remained alert, scanning every shadow and rooftop. Elena had wrapped the practice sword's handle in fresh leather, hiding the mysterious silver inlay. Some marks were better left concealed until you knew who was looking for them. The black carriage had disappeared, but Elena spotted fresh horseshoe prints in the morning dew. They hadn't gone far. As they approached the forge's side entrance, she noticed Master Chen's cart was missing from its usual spot. The old trader never missed market day, hadn't in 20 years according to her father. "Stay," Elena commanded Lynn at the door, but the girl merely looked at her with what could have been amusement. "Fine, but remember you wanted to come." Inside, the forge's morning silence felt charged like the air before a storm. 3 royal guards sat near her workbench, the same ones from the previous night, but now making no effort to hide their purpose. The leader's fine clothes had been replaced by the distinctive dark blue uniform of the Queen's Shadow Guard. Thomas stood at the forge, his hand slightly raised, a gesture that might have looked casual to anyone who didn't know him. But Elena saw how his right thumb pressed against the bellows handle, their signal for armed threats. "Elena Drake," the leader said without turning, "or do you prefer Shadow Whisper these days? Personally, I liked what they called you in the capital. What was it?" "Ghostblade." Elena moved to the forge's center, positioning herself where she could see both exits and the reflection in the polished shield hanging on the wall. "Forge is closed for repairs, gentlemen." Funny. The leader finally turned, revealing a face Elena had hoped never to see again. "That's what Weapons Master Chen said right before you ghosted the entire training program 5 years ago today, if I remember correctly." Commander Caney hadn't aged well. The once sharp features had grown harder, but his eyes retained their predatory gleam. He'd been the Shadow Guard's master trainer, the one who'd discovered Elena's true identity, but not soon enough to stop what happened. "Long time, Caney." Elena kept her voice neutral, still picking up the Queen's messages. The third guard, a young man Elena didn't recognize, tensed at the comment. New blood, eager to prove himself, the most dangerous kind in these situations. Thomas's hand inched toward the barrel, where Elena knew he kept an old cavalry saber. Elena caught his eye and gave a slight headshake. "Not yet." "That's ancient history," Elena said. "I'm retired." "Retired?" Caney laughed. "Is that what you call running a training operation for the Resistance? I have to admit it's clever. Hide in plain sight, forging weapons while pretending to be just another blacksmith's daughter." Lynn's practice sword tapped softly against the stone floor, the sound making the young guard jump, his hand twitching toward his sword belt. "Easy, Marcus," Caney cautioned. "We're just having a friendly conversation about old times, about loyalty, about consequences." "If the Queen sent you," Elena started, but Caney cut her off. "The Queen didn't send me, but someone did. Someone who's very interested in why a former Shadow Guard operative ended up working at a rebel-connected forge in the middle of nowhere. Someone who thinks maybe you're still playing both sides." The pieces clicked into place, the timing, the carriage, Lynn's mysterious sword marking. This wasn't about the training program at all. This was something bigger. "Where's your friend?" Elena asked. "The one with the scratched carriage door." A flicker of confusion crossed Kane's face. Genuine, not performative. Before he could respond, the forge's front door opened, and Captain Sarah Wei walked in, her Royal Guard insignia visible on her cloak. Elena felt the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. "Afternoon, Elena." Sarah nodded, then turned to Caney. "Commander, quite a ride from the capital. Business or pleasure?" Just catching up with an old friend, Captain. Caney's smile returned, sharper now. No law against that. No, Sarah agreed, settling onto a workbench. Just like there's no law against me wondering why Master Chen's trading cart was found abandoned at the mountain pass. The one that went missing after his disappearance. The one with very distinctive wheel markings. Marcus's hand was back near his sword. Elena noted that Caney hadn't touched his weapon. Smart, keeping his reflexes sharp. But Thomas had managed to move closer to the forge bellows, probably preparing to signal their backup. Speaking of missing things, Sarah continued casually, has anyone seen Lady Ming, our weapons trainer? Her daughter says she never returned from her evening practice last night. The implications hung in the air like forge smoke. Elena thought about the black carriage, about Lin's modified practice sword, about Chen's empty market stall. A pattern was emerging, but she couldn't quite see its shape yet. Actually, Caney stood, dropping a coin purse on the workbench. We were just leaving. But we'll be in touch, Ghostblade. After all, every retirement party needs proper planning. As they left, Sarah waited until their footsteps faded before speaking. Want to tell me what that was really about? No, Elena replied honestly, but I get the feeling you're going to be involved either way. Lin emerged from behind a rack of finished swords, moving to Elena's side. The leather wrapping on her practice sword had fallen loose, the silver inlay now clearly visible. Sarah's eyes narrowed at the sight. Interesting coincidence. That's the exact pattern Lady Ming had commissioned for her private students the night she disappeared. There's something bigger going on here. Thomas spoke up, his voice shaky. The weapons deliveries, the disappearances, now this. It's all connected. Yeah, Elena agreed, watching Lin watch the door. And I think I know who's really pulling the strings. The question is, why now, and why here? The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the forge's windows as Elena, Thomas, Sarah, and Lin gathered in Thomas's private workshop. Lin had positioned herself near the door, her practice sword held ready despite her youth, but her eyes alert. The girl's presence seemed to steady everyone's nerves, as if having a young fighter in their midst, even an untested one, made the conversation ahead easier to face. Start from the beginning, Sarah said, her captain's insignia catching the light. And this time, no convenient omissions. Elena exchanged glances with her father, who nodded slightly. Some secrets had expiration dates, and they'd just reached one. The resistance contacts started 2 years ago, Thomas began, his voice barely above a whisper. The Northern Kingdom's rebels needed weapons after the Queen's purge. Small orders, legitimate pieces, nothing too suspicious. We were perfect. Just another struggling forge in the middle of nowhere. And you agreed to this, why? Sarah's hand remained near her sword, her eyes fixed on Thomas. They made it clear, saying no wasn't an option. Thomas pulled out a worn letter from his desk drawer. It showed a royal seal Elena had never seen despite 5 years of working with her father. The paper bore the distinctive watermark of the Queen's private chambers, not the public chancellery. Elena studied the letter, noting details she'd never known about despite years of working alongside her father. The handwriting showed the distinctive flourishes of the royal court, but something about the ink composition seemed wrong. It lacked the subtle sheen of official documents. The pieces started shifting in her mind. That's why you took me in, Elena said quietly. You knew my background. Thomas's laugh held no humor. Knew you were running from something. Figured having someone dangerous in the forge might keep other dangerous people in line. Didn't know you were ex-Shadow Guard until 6 months ago. How? Elena's hand instinctively moved toward her concealed sword. The Queen's people ran a deeper check after Master Chen disappeared. They found old training records, connections. But something wasn't adding up, so they sent Caney to verify. Sarah's quill finally moved across her notebook. And Master Wei, where does he fit in? Wei was their informant, Thomas admitted. Reported everything that happened in the forge, every conversation, every unusual customer, every time Elena did something that didn't fit her cover. The revelation hit Elena like a physical blow. Wei had been watching her for 2 years, reporting her every move. The old healer's convenient absence now carried darker implications. "The attack in the alley this morning," Elena said. "That wasn't random, was it?" "Test run," Thomas confirmed. "The Queen is planning something bigger, the winter solstice ceremony next month. It's not just going to be the usual guard rotation. They're consolidating everything, moving all their Northern Kingdom operations through here in one night." Sarah whistled softly. "How many troops?" 500, maybe more." Thomas's voice shook slightly. Lynn's ears suddenly perked up, seconds before they heard the shop's back door open and close. Captain May appeared in the doorway, her face pale but determined. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, though her tone suggested she wasn't sorry at all. "But you need to see this." She held up a small silver medallion similar to Lynn's. "I extracted this from Lady Ming's practice sword during my investigation. It's not a standard training corps identifier. The marking, it matches a series of badges used by the Queen's personal guard." The room went silent. Elena stared at the medallion, then at Lynn, whose intelligent eyes seemed to hold secrets of their own. "Master Chen," Sarah breathed. "He wasn't just supplying the resistance. He was building evidence. And using his trading routes as cover," Elena finished. "The weapons weren't just for fighting, they were carrying messages." "That's why they're really here," Thomas said. "Caney, Lady Vess, all of them. Whatever evidence Chen collected, it's still out there, and they think you're involved, Elena. You trained with the Shadow Guard, showing up here right when the Resistance started using the forge." May moved further into the workshop, closing the door behind her. "There's more. When I was examining Lady Ming's quarters, I found something embedded in her sword's pommel. A key." She produced a small silver key, unremarkable except for the pattern etched into its surface, the same pattern as the scratch on the black carriage's door. "Royal Vault?" Sarah suggested. "The palace treasury has locks with that craftsmanship." "Where Lady Vess saw my father making deliveries," Elena added. The pattern was becoming clear now. "Chen was building a case against the crown," May said, "using Lin and Lady Ming's other students to transport evidence right under everyone's nose. But something went wrong the night Ming disappeared." Thomas's pocket watch chimed a complex sequence that made his already pale face turn ashen. "Caney's back at the forge with friends. They're asking about Master Wei." Elena checked her sword, then looked at Sarah. "How straight do you really play this, Captain?" Sarah's smile was grim. "Straight enough to keep my commission, crooked enough to keep my conscience. You about the same?" Elena turned to May. "Get to the palace vault, see what's in that key's lock. Father, you go with her. Your name's on their guard list. It'll look natural." "What about you?" May asked. Elena scratched an old mark on her practice sword's handle, earning a knowing look from Lynn. "Time to tend the forge, and maybe have a long overdue conversation about retirement plans." "Elena," Thomas hesitated at the door. "Wait, he wasn't just reporting on you. Last week he started asking questions about the capital, about the Queen's private guard, about military movements that didn't add up." "I know," Elena said quietly. "Just like I know Lady Ming didn't just disappear. The real question is, who are you still paying allegiance to, Father, and why?" Thomas's hand lingered on the ancient forge hammer mounted above the door, its surface marked with symbols that spoke of histories older than the kingdom itself. Through the workshop window, Elena could see the afternoon sun painting the empty courtyard in shades of amber. In the distance, a horn sounded, the fourth watch changing guard, right on schedule. She noticed how her father flinched at the sound. "We should move," Sarah said, breaking the tension. "If Caney's back at the forge, he's not alone, and he's not waiting for an invitation to cause trouble." Elena nodded, her mind already mapping out scenarios and contingencies. "Take the mountain path to the palace. If the Queen's people are watching, they'll expect you to use the main road." She hesitated, choosing her next words carefully. "And May, whatever you find in that vault, don't examine it there. Some answers are better revealed in private." Lynn moved to the door, her posture suggesting she intended to follow Elena despite her youth. There was something in the girl's determined stance that reminded Elena of students she'd trained before, the ones who'd stood by her even when the odds turned ugly. Stay with them, young one, Elena commanded, but Lynn merely sat, her eyes fixed on Elena with what could only be described as stubborn loyalty. All right, but don't say I didn't warn you about the company we're about to keep. As the others prepared to leave, Elena caught her father's arm. One more thing. If Wei was reporting to the Queen's people about me, who was he reporting to about you? Thomas's face showed a flicker of something. Fear, guilt, or maybe both. Some oaths can't be broken, Elena, no matter how many swords change hands. Yeah, Elena agreed, releasing his arm. I'm beginning to understand that better than you think. The Crimson Forge's main chamber felt different in the fading daylight. More arena than workshop, each tool and workbench a potential piece of cover or weapon. Elena moved through the space with practiced ease, Lynn following close despite her youth. Through the front windows, she counted 4 unfamiliar horses, all bearing the distinctive Northern Kingdom breeding that marked them as military stock. Commander Caney sat at the main workbench's center, flanked by Marcus and 2 new faces, hard men with the patient stillness of experienced killers. They'd positioned themselves with clear lines of sight to both exits. Professional work that meant they weren't just here to talk. Hope you don't mind. Caney gestured at an unfinished sword on the bench. It seemed rude to wait. Everything's on display today, Elena replied, noting how they'd all chosen to sit just beyond striking distance of the forge. Special occasion. Reunion, Caney smiled, but his eyes remained cold. Speaking of which, where's Thomas and that pretty Royal Guard captain? Seems like they left in quite a hurry. Elena started her closing routine, organizing tools that were already perfectly placed. Father's making a delivery. Captain Wei had other duties. Fascinating profession, the Royal Guard, Caney mused. All those patrols, perfect for moving certain items across borders. Did you know their northern division got raided right after their commander disappeared? Lady Vess was quite disturbed by it. The pieces clicked together in Elena's mind. Lady Vess hadn't just been investigating. She'd been using the Royal Guard as a distribution network. When things went bad, she'd vanished, leaving others to face the consequences. That's ancient history. Elena kept her voice neutral, but Lynn's subtle shift in stance suggested the girl sensed her tension. History has a way of repeating. Caney reached into his jacket, making everyone tense, but withdrew only an envelope. Like shadow guards who can't stop playing both sides. Tell me, Ghostblade, did you really think we wouldn't figure it out? He slid the envelope across the workbench. Inside were surveillance sketches. Elena meeting with Sarah at the temple, Thomas making deliveries at the palace, Wei's shop after hours, and one that made Elena's blood run cold. Master Chen bound to a chair in what looked like a dungeon, his face bloody but his eyes defiant. Took some convincing, Caney continued, but Chen finally admitted what he discovered about the royal forges, about your convenient appearance right when we started using this place, about Lady Ming and her clever little training program. Marcus shifted in his seat, his hand never far from his sword. The Queen wants everything cleaned up before the winter solstice. No loose ends. Speaking of loose ends, Caney nodded toward Lynn. That girl caused quite a stir. Imagine our surprise when we found out she belonged to Lady Ming, the same Ming who disappeared the night our training records went missing. The same night certain students started vanishing at exactly 4th watch. Elena's mind raced through scenarios. The sketches meant they'd been watching longer than she'd realized. Chen's capture suggested they knew about her father's connection to the crown, but they hadn't moved against Wei or found the vault key yet. They were still fishing for information. You've got it wrong, Elena said carefully, sliding the sketches back. I'm retired, just a blacksmith trying to stay out of trouble. Funny thing about trouble, Caney's smile widened. It has a way of finding people who try to hide from it. Like Chen. Want to know what his last words were? Elena's hand tensed on the hammer she was holding. You're bluffing. Chen's alive. For now, Caney agreed. But that depends on what happens in the next few minutes. See, we know about the evidence he collected. We know he trusted it to his students, and we know one of those students found her way to you. Almost like it was planned. Lynn's practice sword tapped rhythmically against the floor, but Elena gave her a subtle hand signal to stay calm. another skill the girl seemed to know instinctively. "Here's how this plays out," Caney continued. "You tell us where Thomas and the captain went, you hand over whatever was hidden in that practice sword, and maybe Chen gets to see his grandchildren again." "Or," Elena asked, though she already knew the answer, "or we start cleaning house. The forge, the apothecary, the royal training grounds, even that little temple where you and Captain Wei have your private spars. Lots of accidents waiting to happen." The afternoon light had faded enough that Elena could see reflections in the forge's front windows. 4 more guards had taken position outside, their shadow guard armor marking them as elite troops. The black carriage was back, parked at an angle that would block any escape through the courtyard. "Time's running out, Ghostblade." Caney tapped his sword hilt. "Chen's running out of fingers, and so are you." Elena thought about her father and May hopefully reaching the vault by now. About Sarah, who played things just crooked enough to keep her conscience clean. About Chen, who'd been braver than any of them had guessed. And about Lin, who'd found her for a reason. "You know what your mistake was, Caney." Elena's voice carried an edge that made Marcus's hand twitch toward his sword. "Same as the Queen's. You assume everyone's playing the same game you are." "And what game is that?" Caney's smile was predatory. "The one where you think you're the smartest person in the workshop." Lin's ears suddenly perked up, catching something the adults hadn't yet registered. In the distance, horns began to sound, but not the regular watch changes. This was the royal alert pattern calling all guards to their posts. Through the windows, Elena caught fragments of movement, shadow guard troops coordinating their positions around the building. They were professionals, setting up a proper containment zone. No one would approach the forge without being spotted. More importantly, no one would leave without their permission. The weight of the short sword against her spine felt heavier now. 1 blade against at least 8 trained killers. The odds weren't great, but then again, they never were in her previous life. Back when she was training royal guards, she'd learned that superior numbers often bred overconfidence, and overconfident men made mistakes. "What's it going to be, Ghostblade?" Caney's patience was wearing thin. "The evidence for Chen's life. Simple trade." Elena reached under the workbench, making everyone tense but brought out only an old whetstone. "One last edge first for old time's sake." Caney studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Sharpen it. But if you're thinking about the cavalry saber in the barrel, don't. Chen mentioned that little insurance policy of your father's." Elena's hands moved smoothly across the stone, each stroke placed with precise deliberation, creating a pattern only she understood. Lin watched the process with unusual intensity, as if the girl somehow sensed the significance of each movement. "You never asked me why I quit," Elena said, her voice carrying just enough weight to make Caney pause with his hand on his sword hilt. "After the Northern Campaign, after everything went wrong in the capital, did you ever wonder why I just disappeared?" The horns were getting closer now, their call bouncing off the mountains that surrounded Ravencrest Valley, but something about them seemed off. The pattern was wrong for a standard alert, almost like... The horns grew louder, but Caney didn't seem concerned. If anything, his smile widened as he toyed with his sword hilt. "You think Sarah's guard units are coming to save you? Poor Ghostblade, still believing in uniforms after all these years." "Those aren't royal guard horns," Elena replied calmly. "Wrong pattern. Sounds more like the Queen's personal regiment." The smile flickered on Kane's face for just a fraction of a second, enough to confirm Elena's suspicion. Marcus's hand moved closer to his weapon, while the other 2 men exchanged subtle glances. "Interesting theory," Caney recovered quickly, "but irrelevant. We have teams at the palace, the apothecary, and Chen's location. One signal, and this gets very messy for everyone you care about." Elena's hand moved across the whetstone's surface, fingertips brushing against nearly invisible marks worn into the stone over years of service. 5 years of careful preparation hidden in plain sight. Every scratch, every groove, every seemingly random mark all part of a larger plan. "You still haven't asked me about the Northern Campaign," Elena said, her voice carrying an edge that made Marcus shift uncomfortably. About why the entire royal training program changed in one night. About why no one ever found the real training records. Lynn had positioned herself perfectly, exactly where Elena needed her to be. The girl's tactical awareness was too precise to be coincidence. Tell me, Caney, did you ever wonder why Master Chen chose this particular forge, this specific valley? Enough games, Caney snapped, his patience finally cracking. The evidence now, or Chen dies screaming? Elena's laugh held no humor. Chen's been dead for hours. You're not that sloppy, Caney. You never leave witnesses alive. The sketches were staged, probably taken right after you grabbed him last night. The blood patterns are wrong for a long-term captive. The revelation hung in the air like forge smoke. Marcus's hand finally closed around his sword hilt, but Elena continued before he could draw. What you should be asking is why Chen stayed at this forge for 20 years. Why did a former Queen's Bladesmaster spend his retirement watching over a small valley smithy? Caney's face was drained of color. What did you say? Master Chen of the Jade Sword School. Elena's words cut through the tension like a blade. Royal Bladesmaster number 6744 disappeared into exile after testifying against corrupt officials in the capital. The same officials who handled certain arrangements for my father's royal commissions. The same commissions that have been forged with resistance metal for 3 years. The horns were close now, multiple units converging on the forge. Through the windows, Elena caught glimpses of troops moving into position. Caney saw them too, but his expression suggested this was all according to plan. You think I came alone? Caney's confidence had returned. Those aren't your people out there, Ghostblade. That's the Queen's insurance policy. A whole regiment of elite guards. So please, continue with your story. It'll make a great epitaph. You still don't get it, Elena shook her head. This was never about the weapons or the resistance. Chen and I spent 5 years building this case. Every forged blade, every transaction, every piece of evidence documented and distributed to secure locations. Lady Ming was just one part of a much larger investigation. Shadows deepened as heavy footsteps approached the forge's entrance. Caney raised his hand, presumably to signal his teams at the palace and apothecary, but Elena continued. Here's what you really missed. The Northern campaign didn't fail because of betrayal. It ended because the Queen's own brother turned evidence against everyone, including the corrupt officials who helped train her shadow guard. The forge's front door burst open, troops flooding in with military precision. But instead of moving to support Caney, they took position around the room's perimeter, weapons trained inward. Master Chen sends his regards, Elena's voice carried clearly as the units moved into final position. He didn't die last night. He completed his mission, just like he did in the Northern campaign when he helped me expose the Shadow Guard's corruption, just like Lady Ming did when she trained students to carry encrypted messages in their practice swords. Caney lunged for his sword, but Lynn was faster. Her practice sword's wooden form dropping away to reveal tempered steel beneath. The girl's amateur demeanor vanished as she launched herself across the workshop, taking Marcus down before he could draw. The other men found themselves facing the business ends of royal blades. The weapon deliveries, the training program, my convenient appearance here. It was all orchestrated, Elena explained, as Caney was secured. A 5-year operation to identify every corrupt official in the Queen's inner circle. Chen's death was the signal to move in those horns. That's the second wave of arrests hitting every Shadow Guard position in the Northern Kingdom simultaneously. You son of a... Caney spat as manacles clicked around his wrists. You played us all this time. No, Elena corrected him. You played yourselves, just like the Queen did. Too busy looking for complicated betrayals to see the simple truth. Through the front windows, more troops arrived. Familiar faces from Elena's past life emerging into the fading mountain light. Chen stepped through the door, very much alive, his blade gleaming with the distinctive jade inlay of the Royal Blade Masters. Sometimes, Elena said quietly, watching Lynn resume her position beside her with perfect form. The best place to hide is right where everyone can see you. Thomas emerged from behind the troops, his face a mix of relief and exhaustion. For 5 years, he'd played his part perfectly. The desperate forge master caught up in something too big to escape. Every worried glance, every trembling hand, every late-night conversation about royal pressure had built their cover story one detail at a time. "Your mother would be proud," Elena told him, earning a genuine smile from her adoptive father. 15 years undercover with the Queen's personal guard, and her son follows in her footsteps. The royal connection had to be believable, Thomas shrugged, but Elena could see the pride in his eyes. What better way than to use my real family history? Mom always said the best covers grow from seeds of truth. Lynn walked over to Chen, who knelt to examine her practice sword's hidden blade. The old blade master grinned as Lynn demonstrated a perfect royal guard stance, all pretense of amateur training gone. "Trained her well, master," Elena nodded. "Best young operative I've ever worked with." Caney watched this reunion with growing comprehension and fury. Everything he thought he knew about the past 5 years was unraveling in front of him. The hunter had become the prey, and he'd never even seen the trap being set. The game was rigged from the start, he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "Every move you made was exactly what we wanted you to make," Elena finished for him. "That's the thing about people like you and the Queen. You're so used to being the smartest ones in the room, you forget to look for the simple plays. The aftermath of an operation was always the most dangerous time." Elena knew this from experience. The moment when victory felt assured was when hidden threats often emerged. As royal troops processed Caney and his men, Elena's attention remained fixed on the windows, watching the gathering darkness beyond the forge's lights. "Sarah's team just checked in," Chen reported, sheathing his blade. "They secured the vault. Lady Vess tried to intercept them at the palace, but let's just say Captain Wei remembers more from her royal guard training than her current position suggests." Elena raised an eyebrow. Another layer of careful planning revealed. Sarah's background as a royal guard explained her perfect cover as a local captain. Is she okay? More than okay. Apparently, Lady Vess didn't expect her old training partner to remember their sparring sessions. She'll need a few stitches before questioning. Lynn had returned to Elena's side, her bearing now unmistakably that of a trained royal guard initiate. The girl's eyes constantly scanned the room, alert for any remaining threats. Through the windows, Elena could see troops securing the perimeter, but something still felt off. "You're wondering about the Queen," Thomas said quietly, joining them at the workbench. "Why she isn't here personally?" 5 years of operation, Elena nodded. Her entire northern network was exposed. The woman I knew would want to handle this herself. Chen's expression darkened. "That's because this isn't just about the North. The evidence we collected, the messages Lynn's been carrying, it goes way beyond border disputes. Royal advisors, military commanders, even religious leaders. The Queen has built herself an empire of corruption, and empires don't fall easily," Elena finished. The forge's bell rang, an unusual occurrence this late. Elena answered with caution, keeping her voice neutral. "Crimson Forge." "Ghost Blade." The Queen's voice carried the same smooth confidence Elena remembered from their brief encounters years ago. "Or should I say Master Elena? I must admit you had me fooled. We all thought you'd burned out after the Northern campaign, gone native like so many do." Elena switched to the speaking tube's royal frequency, signaling Chen silently. The Blade Master immediately began tracking procedures, but Elena knew it would be futile. The Queen hadn't survived this long by being careless with communications. "Sorry to disappoint," Elena replied, "but then again, disappointment seems to be going around. Your Shadow Guard is finished, Your Majesty." "The Shadow Guard?" The Queen's laugh held genuine amusement. "You think this was about a few corrupt guards in border fortresses? Tell me, Ghostblade, did you ever wonder why I let you play your game for 5 years? Why did I make it so convenient for you to build your case?" The implications sent a chill through the workshop. Thomas and Chen exchanged worried glances as the Queen continued. "Right now, Captain Wei is delivering exactly what I wanted her to find. That vault, the encrypted messages, Lynn's mysterious sword markings, all breadcrumbs I laid out carefully, because sometimes the best way to eliminate royal oversight is to let them think they've won." Elena's mind raced through the possibilities. The winter solstice ceremony, It's not about consolidating your guard forces. Finally, she begins to understand. The Queen's satisfaction was palpable. When royal resources are concentrated on a single major operation, other opportunities present themselves. Your team has spent 5 years building a case that will never see the light of day, because in about 6 hours, every piece of evidence you've collected will be used to destroy the credibility of the entire investigation. Chen was already on his communication stone, trying to reach Sarah's team. Thomas moved to the windows, scanning the street with renewed urgency. "Did you really think Lady Vess showed up by accident?" the Queen continued. "That Sarah's past with her was just a coincidence? Everything that's happened from Chen's apparent disappearance to tonight's little drama has been orchestrated. The question is, Ghostblade, what are you going to do about it?" The line went dead, leaving behind a silence heavy with realization. Elena looked at Lynn, remembering how the girl had found her that morning, not by chance but by design. "Chen," Elena's voice carried an urgency that made everyone turn. "The blade markings, did anyone verify their authenticity?" The old blade master's face paled. Standard protocols were followed, but if the Queen had access to royal forging resources, she could have planted her own version, Thomas finished. Which means whatever Sarah found in that vault is exactly what the Queen wanted us to find. Elena was already moving, checking her sword's edge. Where was her team headed? "Secure royal facility in the capital," Chen replied. "Standard evidence processing protocol." Which is exactly what the Queen is counting on. Elena grabbed her forge cloak, the weight of her choices settling around her like armor. "How long until that evidence gets logged into royal records?" 6 hours. Thomas checked his pocket watch. Maybe less. Elena fastened her sword belt, its familiar weight both comfort and warning. Then we have 6 hours to prevent a good operation from becoming part of something much worse. The question is, who's really on our side? The forge's lights flickered once, then died, plunging them into darkness. In the distance, new horns began to sound, but not the royal guard's calls. This was the deeper, more ominous tone of the Queen's personal regiment, the kind she preferred for her more direct interventions. "We need to move." Chen was already retrieving backup weapons from his hidden cache behind the forge. If the Queen is playing this card, she's got troops already in position at every major checkpoint between here and the capital. That's what she's expecting. Elena checked her blades. No signal stones working, another part of the Queen's plan falling into place. She knows every official route, every protocol, which means we need to do something she won't expect. Thomas emerged from his private workshop with a dusty map marked with routes that weren't on any official charts. There's an old smuggler's path that connects to the royal forest trails. Barely maintained, definitely not in any official documentation. My mother used it back when she was running her own operations against corruption in the royal court. "Your mother," Elena said slowly, pieces clicking into place. "She didn't just work royal guard, did she? Let's just say some retirements are more official than others." Thomas's smile held a hint of pride. "And some family traditions go deeper than they appear." The sound of marching troops was closer now, royal search parties beginning to sweep the area around the forge. Lynn moved to the back door, her stance suggesting she knew exactly which route they needed to take. 6 hours, Elena confirmed, making her decision. To stop a 5-year operation from becoming something much worse. Time to show the Queen why some legends deserve their reputation. The smuggler's path twisted through the mountains like a serpent shedding its skin, each turn revealing fresh challenges. Elena's group moved silently through the darkness, years of training evident in how they navigated the treacherous terrain without lights. Lynn led the way, her young eyes better suited to the darkness, while Chen brought up the rear, his jade sword ready for any pursuit. 3 miles to the forest junction, Thomas called softly, studying the map by touch more than sight. After that, we've got about 40 minutes of decent trail before we hit the real challenge. The old temple access paths haven't been maintained since the last dynasty. Most folks think they're impassable. Chen checked his backup blade again. Still no signal stones working. The Queen is using royal dampening crystals. Everything within 50 miles is probably dark. She's not taking any chances this time, not after what happened in the Northern campaign. Through breaks in the canopy, Elena caught glimpses of royal search parties moving with tactical precision through the valley below. She had counted at least 3 units, with more likely on the way. The formation pattern suggested elite guards, another piece of the Queen's elaborate preparation. Sarah's got at least an hour head start on us, Elena calculated, as she helped Lynn navigate a particularly treacherous section. But she's on the main roads following protocol. She can handle herself. Chen's confidence wasn't just professional courtesy. Did 2 tours with the Royal Elite Guard before becoming a captain. That military background is why we recruited her for this operation. She's not just playing a role, she's as much an operative as any of us. And Lady Vess? Elena asked, thinking about the woman's too perfect timing at Way's shop. Her appearance seemed a little too convenient. Not originally, Thomas shifted uncomfortably as they paused to check their direction. When we discovered her connections to the Queen's inner circle, we thought we could use her, turn her ambition into an advantage. What we didn't count on was how deep her own cover went. Except the Queen was 3 steps ahead. Elena's grip tightened on her sword as they hit a particularly rough patch, loose stones threatening to give away their position. She knew we'd try to use Vess, just like she knew we'd follow protocol with the evidence. Every move we thought we were making independently was part of her larger game. Lynn suddenly tensed, her hand raising in the signal for silence. Her posture shifted from alert to combat, ready in an instant. Seconds later, they all heard it, the distinctive sound of troops moving through the forest, the low rustle of royal armor designed for stealth operations. They're not just on the main roads, Chen realized, already checking the surrounding trees for ambush positions. They've got forest units too, professional squads, probably royal rangers from their movement patterns. Elena killed all movement, letting the group settle into natural shadows. Through the darkness ahead, she caught glimpses of motion, troops positioned at strategic points along the trail. The setup was too precise to be improvised. 5, maybe 6 units, she assessed, years of experience taking over. Professional work, multiple containment layers. They're not trying to catch us, they're hurting us. Forcing us onto a specific route, Thomas finished, his voice dropping to a whisper. Just like they did with Captain Wei. Chen was already checking their remaining weapons, the practiced movements of a veteran blade master. We've got maybe 4 minutes before they realize we've stopped. Options? Elena looked at Lynn, remembering how the girl had led them through the alleys that morning. Not by chance, but with purpose. Every detail of this operation suddenly felt connected, like pieces of a puzzle finally revealing its true picture. Thomas, that map of your mother's, how well do you know these mountains? Like the back of my hand. Mom made sure I learned every trail, every cave system. Said knowledge like that might save my life someday. Turns out she wasn't just being paranoid. Cave system? Elena's interest sharpened. You mean the old temple tunnels? The ones that supposedly collapsed after the last dynasty? Thomas's eyes widened with understanding. Supposedly, but some of us know better. Mom used them during her investigations. Said they connected half the valley's old temples to various exit points in the mountains. The official records show them as condemned, but that's just another layer of cover. The young girl's answering nod held no hesitation as they disappeared into a seemingly solid rock face, the Queen's search parties painting the empty trail in harsh torchlight, illuminating a game piece that had already been removed from the board. In the distance, thunder rolled across the mountains, nature's own signal that the real chase was about to begin. The temple tunnels were a maze of darkness and echoes, their ancient stones groaning under the weight of centuries. Elena's eyes adjusted slowly, revealing worn carvings that told stories of dynasties long past. Lynn moved ahead confidently, her training evident in how she navigated the uneven ground without making a sound. These tunnels were part of the original temple network, Thomas explained, his voice barely above a whisper. But during the last civil war, they became something else entirely. Escape routes, hidden armories, secret meeting places. My mother said half of the kingdom's real history happened down here. Chen brought up the rear, his experienced eyes constantly scanning for pursuit. How far to the royal vault? Quarter mile, maybe less. Thomas consulted his mother's notebook. Mom mapped every connection, every intersection. The main chamber should connect directly to one of the older temple sanctuaries. The thunder from above was muffled but still audible, along with the distant sound of troops moving through the valley. The Queen's forces would be discovering their abandoned trail by now, realizing they'd been outmaneuvered. "Something's been bothering me," Elena said as they navigated another junction. "The timing of it all. Chen's disappearance exactly when it happened, Lynn finding me this morning, Lady Vess showing up at the perfect moment, even the raid on the forge. It's too coordinated. You think we're still playing into the Queen's plan?" Chen's question carried an edge of concern. "I think we're missing something bigger." Elena paused at an intersection, studying the ancient stonework. "Lynn, what do you make of this?" The girl moved forward, examining the wall intently. Her behavior changed suddenly, alert, focused, like she'd found something significant. "These stones," Thomas moved closer, running his hand along the surface. "They're not original. The cutting patterns are wrong for Dynasty-era work." Elena's torch revealed fresh tool marks carefully disguised to look ancient. "These tunnels haven't been abandoned at all. Someone's been maintaining them, upgrading them. Recently, but why?" Chen wondered aloud. "Because that's not the Queen's style," a new voice echoed through the tunnel. Sarah emerged from a side passage, her captain's uniform suggesting she'd never headed for the capital at all. "She doesn't just use resources, she turns them into traps." Elena's sword was up instantly, but Lynn's relaxed posture suggested Sarah wasn't a threat. "You were supposed to be transporting evidence." "That was the official plan," she agreed, producing a small jade token. "But some of us had orders that went deeper. This is what the Queen is really after." The pieces started clicking together in Elena's mind. The vault was a decoy, the whole transport operation a carefully choreographed distraction. While everyone focuses on stopping the evidence from reaching royal records, they miss what's happening right under their feet, Sarah finished. Thomas understood now. "These tunnels, they're not just passages, they're infrastructure." Chen cursed softly. "Supply routes, training grounds. They've been using the old temple network to build some kind of shadow army." "Not just any army," Sarah held up the jade token. "This contains everything Lady Ming discovered before she disappeared. The Queen has been building a force that connects temple warriors, royal guards, and shadow assassins, all hidden beneath official records." A distant explosion rocked the tunnel, sending centuries of dust cascading from the ceiling. Lynn's ears pricked up, tracking sounds they couldn't hear. "They're sealing the exits," Elena realized. "The Queen isn't trying to stop us. She's forcing us exactly where she wants us." "The temple sanctuary," Thomas consulted his mother's notebook again. "It's not just a holy site. According to these notes, it was built on top of something older, something from before the last dynasty." Sarah nodded grimly. "A training ground perfect for housing an army, complete with forge rooms and practice halls. That's what Lady Ming discovered. The Queen isn't just moving troops through Ravencrest Valley. She's building a parallel military force invisible to royal oversight, and now she's got us all down here." Chen's tactical assessment was grim. Cut off from backup, running out of options. Elena watched Lynn, noting how the girl kept returning to certain carved symbols, her behavior suggesting there was more to discover. "Maybe that's the point. We're all looking for a way out, but what if we should be looking for a way in?" "The training grounds," Sarah caught on quickly. "If we can reach the main sanctuary, we can expose the whole operation." "Not just the corrupt guards or the shadow army," Thomas finished, "but the entire underground network." Another explosion rumbled through the tunnels, closer this time. Elena could hear voices now, royal troops moving with professional precision. "How long until they reach us?" Thomas asked, already checking his remaining weapons. 10 minutes, maybe less, Elena estimated. "But they'll be careful. These tunnels are too valuable to risk collapsing." Lynn suddenly froze, her attention fixed on a seemingly solid wall. Elena's torch revealed what the girl had discovered: tool marks, fresh ones carefully concealed behind centuries of temple carvings. Looks like we found our way in. Sarah moved to examine the wall. But we'll only get one shot at this. And the Queen is counting on that, Elena added, the full scope of their situation becoming clear. The question is, are we walking into another trap, or are we about to spring one of our own? The hidden door yielded to their combined effort, revealing a chamber that bore little resemblance to the temple tunnels they'd left behind. Polished stone floors housed weapons racks and training circles, and the air carried the distinct sound of voices and movement. Lynn moved forward cautiously, her training evident in how she analyzed each new sound and position. This is Royal Guard construction, Chen observed, running his hand along a reinforced pillar, designed to withstand siege warfare. And expensive, Sarah added, her military experience showing in how she maintained perfect situational awareness while examining their surroundings. This kind of facility costs more than most noble houses earn in a decade. The question is, where's the money really coming from? Elena's mind was already piecing it together. The weapon deliveries, the training program, it was never about border defense. It was about creating a cover story, a smokescreen to hide something much bigger. They reached an intersection where ornate temple doors had been installed, their ancient locks replaced with royal mechanisms. Thomas consulted his mother's notebook, comparing the new layout to the original temple plans. These modifications are recent, he said, pointing to fresh tool marks around the door frames. But they follow the temple's original design. Someone knew exactly what they were looking for down here. Lynn suddenly tensed, her attention fixed on something ahead. Before Elena could signal the others to stop, a familiar voice echoed through the chamber. Impressive, isn't it? Lady Vess stepped into view, her riding leathers replaced by Royal Guard armor. 5 years of construction, all happening right under a valley's sacred ground, the ultimate blank spot on the royal maps. Sarah's sword was up instantly, but Vess seemed unconcerned. Really, Sarah? After everything we built together in the capital? You mean after you used the guard as a front? Sarah's voice carried years of controlled anger. After you disappeared when it all went wrong? I disappeared because I was promoted, Vess smiled, the expression never reaching her eyes. The Queen recognized talent, saw potential in what we were doing with the guard program. Imagined something bigger. Elena noticed movement in the shadows behind Vess, royal troops taking position. Professional work, but they weren't trying to hide their presence. This was theater, carefully staged. The training program, Elena said, drawing Vess's attention. It's not just about creating soldiers or moving troops. You're building something else. Finally, someone asks the right question. Vess gestured at their surroundings. What you see here is just the prototype. Imagine it scaled up. An entire shadow army running parallel to official forces. Training, deployment, command structure, all accessible through networks that don't officially exist. Chen's tactical assessment was grim. A military force invisible to oversight. More than that, Sarah realized, her guard background providing insight. The temple connection, the royal resources, you're not just building an army. We're building the future. Vess's enthusiasm seemed genuine now. A world where certain powers can operate completely outside traditional constraints. No oversight, no regulations, no boundaries. Thomas's hand tightened on his sword. And my mother? Did she discover this when she was investigating the royal court? Elena Drake. Vess nodded respectfully. She got remarkably close to the truth. Unfortunately, some secrets need to stay buried, just like these tunnels. The royal troops moved forward, their weapons trained with professional precision. Lynn's practiced sword shifted subtly, but Elena gave her a signal to hold position. Here's what I don't understand, Elena said, playing for time while her mind raced through options. Why show us all this? Why not just eliminate us back in the valley? Because some threats are more valuable alive, a new voice announced. The Queen herself emerged from a side chamber, her presence commanding immediate attention, especially when they can be repurposed. Elena studied the woman she'd hunted for so long, elegant despite the underground setting, radiating the kind of confidence that came from absolute control. The evidence you've been chasing, the Queen continued, The information Lady Ming collected, all part of a larger plan. When that evidence hits royal records, it won't just discredit your investigation. It'll open pathways we've spent years creating. Every guard unit, every temple, every noble house, all compromised in an instant. And us? Chen asked, though he likely knew the answer. Insurance, the Queen smiled coldly. The respected blade master, the undercover operative, the blacksmith's daughter with a hidden past. Your deaths will help sell the narrative, a tragic end to a corrupt investigation. Sarah's laugh carried no humor. You really think you can contain this, that no one else knows? My dear Captain, the Queen's tone suggested genuine admiration. Containment was never the goal. Chaos was. When your bodies are found in these tunnels, when the evidence proves corruption at the highest levels, when trust in the royal system completely erodes, she spread her hands expansively. That's when our real work begins. Elena felt Lin shift slightly beside her, the girl's muscles tensing in a way that suggested she'd sensed something the adults hadn't yet registered. Years of working with trained operatives had taught her to trust those instincts. Quite a speech, Elena said, buying seconds they desperately needed. But you forgot something important. Oh? The Queen's amusement seemed genuine. Do enlighten us, Ghostblade. Elena's smile was as cold as a mountain winter. Some legends don't need to hide in the shadows. The underground facility's lights flickered once, then died, plunging the chamber into total darkness. In the sudden blackness, Lin moved with deadly precision, years of temple training taking over. The girl's attack was silent, efficient, just like Elena had trained her during their secret sessions. As temple lights gradually returned, casting the chamber in blood-red ceremonial glow, the situation had changed dramatically. 3 of the Queen's elite guards were down, Lin standing over one with cold efficiency. Sarah had disarmed Lady Vess, their years of training together proving more lethal than anticipated. Chen and Thomas had taken strategic positions, their blades covering the remaining threats. The Queen alone seemed unperturbed by the chaos. Impressive choreography, but did you really think we wouldn't be prepared for a power failure? Actually, Elena said, we were counting on your preparation. She nodded toward the chamber's ancient pillars, now humming with new energy. All those backup systems, all that redundancy, it makes for quite a power signature when you know what to look for. Understanding dawned in the Queen's eyes. The temple warriors. They're not following the evidence to the capital, Sarah confirmed, keeping Vess covered. They're following the energy patterns, kind of hard to hide the power requirements for a facility this size, especially when someone knows exactly what to look for. Lady Ming, the Queen's voice carried genuine admiration. She wasn't just collecting evidence about the army, she was mapping energy flows, tracking unusual patterns in the temple network. Smart woman. Shame about her disappearance, Chen added, his blade never wavering. The thing is, before that disappearance, she made sure certain information reached very specific people. People who've spent the last 5 years building a case that goes way beyond a shadow army. Thomas moved to one of the ancient temple bells, producing a small jade token from his tunic. Mom wasn't just mapping these tunnels. She was documenting everything, the construction, the power consumption, the noble house connections. All those breadcrumbs leading right back to your legitimate operations. The weapon deliveries were never about arming anyone, Elena explained, watching realization spread across the Queen's face. It was about establishing patterns, creating a trail that even the best royal advisors couldn't explain away. Lady Vess laughed suddenly, the sound echoing off the temple walls. You still don't get it, do you? This facility, the evidence, the whole operation, it's already served its purpose. The moment you walked into these tunnels, you activated exactly what we needed. Lin's stance deepened as new sounds emerged from the darkness beyond the ceremonial lights. More troops moving into position, but these weren't Queen's guards. Their movement patterns were different, more disciplined. Temple warriors, Elena noted calmly, finally showing their hand. Exactly. The Queen's smile returned. walking right into a facility filled with evidence of their own corruption. By this time tomorrow, every major temple will be compromised. Trust in the old ways will collapse, and in the chaos, you'll step in with your shadow army, Sarah finished, offering stability through your private forces, your untraceable operations. Your new world order, Lady Vess added proudly, built on the ashes of the old system. Elena exchanged glances with Lynn, a silent communication born of months working together. The girl's posture shifted slightly, a signal that only her trainer would recognize. Quite a plan, Elena admitted. Almost perfect except for one small detail. She reached into her tunic, producing not a weapon, but a familiar jade medallion. Remember when I said some legends don't need to hide in the shadows? The Queen's confidence faltered for the first time. The training medallion, but we checked. You checked Lynn for current medallions, Elena corrected, but her original one, the one from Lady Ming's first class of temple warriors, that's been broadcasting everything for the last hour. Every word, every confession, every detail of your new world order, all transmitted directly to multiple temple sanctuaries. Impossible, Lady Vess protested. The dampening crystals work great against royal frequencies, Chen smiled. But old temple tech? The kind used back in our early training? Turns out some outdated methods still have their uses. The temple warriors were close now, their movements precise and coordinated, but they weren't heading for Elena and her team. Their weapons were trained on the Queen and Lady Vess. 5 years of planning, the Queen said quietly, all undone by outdated technology and a child warrior. That's the thing about legends. Elena scratched Lynn's shoulder as the temple forces moved in. The old ones often work better than the new ones, especially when everyone's too busy looking for complicated solutions to see the simple truth. As jade manacles clicked around the Queen's wrists, Elena caught a glimpse of genuine respect in the monarch's eyes. Well played, Ghostblade. But tell me, what happens to the legend now? Back to forging weapons in a mountain valley? Elena looked at her team, at Sarah's determined strength, Thomas's quiet competence, Chen's unwavering loyalty, at Lynn, who had followed her from one life into another without hesitation. Some legends, she replied, are just getting started. The valley looked different in the morning light, less a fortress of secrets and more just another sacred place waiting to return to simpler times. Elena stood in the Crimson Forge, going through her usual routine of checking blades and preparing fires that were already perfect. Some habits were worth keeping, even after your cover was blown. Through the windows, she could see Lynn practicing in the courtyard, her movements now openly displaying the precision of temple training. Like Elena, the girl seemed content with their new life, keeping one eye on the mountains out of training rather than necessity. Perhaps that was the true meaning of legend, not the stories people told about you, but the simple truths you passed on to others. In that way, every ring of her hammer on hot steel was both an ending and a beginning, forging not just weapons, but the next generation of protectors this valley would need. Elena smiled. Some legends, it seemed, were best kept in plain sight after all. As temple lights gradually returned, casting the chamber in blood-red ceremonial glow, the situation had changed dramatically. 3 of the Queen's elite guards were down, Lynn standing over one with cold efficiency. Sarah had disarmed Lady Vess, their years of training together proving more lethal than anticipated. Chen and Thomas had taken strategic positions, their blades covering the remaining threats. The Queen alone seemed unperturbed by the chaos. Impressive choreography, but did you really think we wouldn't be prepared for a power failure? Actually, Elena said, we were counting on your preparation. She nodded toward the chamber's ancient pillars, now humming with new energy. All those backup systems, all that redundancy, it makes for quite a power signature when you know what to look for. Understanding dawned in the Queen's eyes. The temple warriors. They're not following the evidence to the capital, Sarah confirmed, keeping Vess covered. They're following the energy patterns. Kinda hard to hide the power requirements for a facility this size, especially when someone knows exactly what to look for. Lady Ming, the Queen's voice carried genuine admiration. She wasn't just collecting evidence about the army. She was mapping energy flows, tracking unusual patterns in the temple network. Smart woman. Shame about her disappearance, Chen added, his blade never wavering. The thing is, before that disappearance, she made sure certain information reached very specific people. People who've spent the last 5 years building a case that goes way beyond a shadow army. Thomas moved to one of the ancient temple bells, producing a small jade token from his tunic. Mom wasn't just mapping these tunnels. She was documenting everything. The construction, the power consumption, the noble house connections, all those breadcrumbs leading right back to your legitimate operations. The weapon deliveries were never about arming anyone, Elena explained, watching realization spread across the Queen's face. It was about establishing patterns, creating a trail that even the best royal advisors couldn't explain away. Lady Vess laughed suddenly, the sound echoing off the temple walls. You still don't get it, do you? This facility, the evidence, the whole operation, it's already served its purpose. The moment you walked into these tunnels, you activated exactly what we needed. Lin's stance deepened as new sounds emerged from the darkness beyond the ceremonial lights. More troops moving into position, but these weren't Queen's guards. Their movement patterns were different, more disciplined. Temple warriors, Elena noted calmly, finally showing their hand. Exactly. The Queen's smile returned. Walking right into a facility filled with evidence of their own corruption. By this time tomorrow, every major temple will be compromised. Trust in the old ways will collapse, and in the chaos, you'll step in with your shadow army, Sarah finished. Offering stability through your private forces, your untraceable operations. Your new world order, Lady Vess added proudly, built on the ashes of the old system. Elena exchanged glances with Lin, a silent communication born of months working together. The girl's posture shifted slightly, a signal that only her trainer would recognize. Quite a plan, Elena admitted. Almost perfect, except for one small detail. She reached into her tunic, producing not a weapon but a familiar jade medallion. Remember when I said some legends don't need to hide in the shadows? The Queen's confidence faltered for the first time. The training medallion, but we checked. You checked Lin for current medallions, Elena corrected. But her original one, the one from Lady Ming's first class of temple warriors, that's been broadcasting everything for the last hour. Every word, every confession, every detail of your new world order, all transmitted directly to multiple temple sanctuaries. Impossible, Lady Vess protested. The dampening crystals work great against royal frequencies, Chen smiled. But old temple tech? The kind used back in our early training? Turns out some outdated methods still have their uses. The temple warriors were close now, their movements precise and coordinated, but they weren't heading for Elena and her team. Their weapons were trained on the Queen and Lady Vess. 5 years of planning, the Queen said quietly. All undone by outdated technology and a child warrior. That's the thing about legends. Elena scratched Lin's shoulder as the temple forces moved in. The old ones often work better than the new ones, especially when everyone's too busy looking for complicated solutions to see the simple truth. As jade manacles clicked around the Queen's wrists, Elena caught a glimpse of genuine respect in the monarch's eyes. Well played, Ghostblade. But tell me, what happens to the legend now? Back to forging weapons in a mountain valley? Elena looked at her team, at Sarah's determined strength, Thomas's quiet competence, Chen's unwavering loyalty, at Lin, who had followed her from one life into another without hesitation. Some legends, she replied, are just getting started. The valley looked different in the morning light, less a fortress of secrets and more just another sacred place waiting to return to simpler times. Elena stood in the Crimson Forge, going through her usual routine of checking blades and preparing fires that were already perfect. Some habits were worth keeping, even after your cover was blown. Through the windows, she could see Lin practicing in the courtyard, her movements now openly displaying the precision of temple training. Like Elena, the girl seemed content with their new life, keeping one eye on the mountains out of training rather than necessity. Perhaps that was the true meaning of legend, not the stories people told about you, but the simple truths you passed on to others. In that way, every ring of her hammer on hot steel was both an ending and a beginning, forging not just weapons, but the next generation of protectors this valley would need. Elena smiled. Some legends, it seemed, were best kept in plain sight after all. 1 week later, the Crimson Forge looked different in the morning light, less a secret stronghold, and more just another mountain valley workshop waiting to open its doors. Elena stood behind her anvil, going through her usual routine of checking tools and stoking fires that were already perfect. Some habits were worth keeping, even after your cover was blown. Lynn practiced in the courtyard, her movements now openly displaying the precision of temple training. Like Elena, the girl seemed content with their new life, maintaining vigilance out of discipline rather than necessity. The forge wouldn't be the same without Master Chen's daily inspections, though Elena supposed they wouldn't need quite as much security anymore. Thomas emerged from his workshop with a stack of orders, legitimate ones now. The Queen's shadow army was being dismantled, her corruption exposed. But Elena knew that some threats never truly disappeared. They just transformed into new challenges. Sarah and the Temple Warriors had established a new training program, one that operated in the open, teaching both combat and ethics. The old underground chambers now served as historical reminders rather than secret facilities. Elena picked up her hammer, its weight familiar and comforting. Through the window, she spotted Lynn teaching a young student the basics of sword stance, the next generation of valley protectors already taking shape. Some legends, Elena muttered to herself, watching the morning sun paint the valley in shades of possibility, are meant to be shared, not hidden. She smiled, knowing that sometimes the best way to protect something wasn't to bury it in shadows, but to forge it in plain sight, where everyone could see its true strength. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.